Hi, I'm Robin Klein. I'm Assistant General Counsel with League of Oregon Cities, and we're here to talk about ethics. We are going to talk about these 9 topics as it relates to Oregon ethics laws. First off, we're going to start with Oregon government ethics laws, specifically Oregon Revised Statute Chapter 244, Oregon Administrative Rules Chapter 199, as they apply to all public officials in Oregon, which includes someone like me who works for the League of Oregon Cities. You might ask, who is the Oregon Government Ethics Commission? They're a state agency that has appointments to their commission, and they oversee various areas to include ethics. So you might ask, am I a public official? There's a definition for that. You are a public official if you're a city elected official, a city staff member, a city employee, or even a volunteer for the city. No compensation is required. So like I said, I work for the board of directors for the League of Oregon Cities, and I too am a public official. So I have to know and apply these ethics laws. So who administers the ethics laws? The Oregon Government Ethics Commission, as I previously mentioned, are the ones who administer those Oregon Revised Statutes and those Oregon Administrative Rules. I refer to them either as the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, or OGEC, or OGEC. You'll also hear about the Oregon Government Ethics Commission administering Oregon Public Meetings laws in a later session. What the OGEC does as a commission body, they have city staff, or what is similar to city staff. They have staff for the Oregon Government Ethics Commission that reviews and investigates complaints that go to the Ethics Commission that can be submitted by anybody. They resolve through resolution, either mediation, investigation, or just through dismissal of complaints. They can also, most importantly, render advice to any individual or public official to which ethics laws apply. They can do that in writing through a formal opinion from the commission, or they can do it verbally, more informally, over the phone or email. That's an important thing for you to know about moving forward if you have any questions about how ethics laws apply to you, or in a later session how Oregon Public Meeting Laws applies to you. And then finally, they adjudicate those Oregon Revised Statutes and Oregon Administrative Rules. And that could include things like letters of education or up to a penalty of a civil fine up to $5,000. So other than state ethics laws, what does the Oregon Government Ethics Commission have jurisdiction over? The legislature has given them jurisdiction over, as we've mentioned, state ethics laws, as well as lobby laws, and as a later session, public meeting laws. That's new as of October 2024. It's important to remember that ethics laws that the OGEC investigates and adjudicates does not include demeanor, misinformation, financial management, anything related to campaign finance, or moral compass. There are other state agencies that may have jurisdiction over some of those categories, specifically Secretary of State over campaign finance. We're going to move into what I think is the most difficult thing to comprehend, so stick with this as we go through the gift analysis. So you're thinking, I'm a public official, what is a gift? The definition, as you can see, is something of economic value given to a public official, a candidate, or a relative or member of the household of the public official or candidate, without valuable consideration of equivalent value, including the full or partial forgiveness of indebtedness, which is not extended to others on the same terms and conditions, or for valuable consideration less than required from others who are not public officials or candidates. That's a lot of words to say. Essentially, if it wasn't available to the members of the public under the same terms and conditions, it's likely a gift in which you'll need to go through several steps of analysis to decide whether or not you can accept that gift. For example, if you're at Safeway and you're shopping for a bag of chips, and that bag of chips is on sale from $9.99 to $5, you go and you want that bag of chips. You, as a public official, can still get that sale or discount from Safeway for that $5 bag of chips because it's available to the general public. However, if you are an elected official and you're going and you have that $9.99 bag of chips and you go to the cashier and the cashier is excited because they voted for you and they want to comp that bag of chips for you, you're going to need to flag that as a potential gift because it's not available to this under the same terms and conditions to the general public. This is an important slide to revisit as you go through whether or not you can accept a gift. There are gift limits on what a public official or a relative or household member may accept or not accept a gift. We're going to go over each of these in turn in later slides, but specifically, you need to know, one, if you're a public official or relative or household member, are receiving something that is more than $50 in a calendar year from a single known source that has a legislative or administrative interest in your decision making, then you may not be able to accept that gift. So let's dig in a little bit more. Who is a relative? You know you're a public official, but who is a relative as it relates to Oregon ethics laws? It's very broad and expansive. So think your spouse, child, child-in-law, parents, step-parents, siblings, step-siblings. Public official has support or legal obligations, and the list goes on and on. You'll want to familiarize yourself with this expansive definition of who a relative is, because they too have to comply with the ethics laws that we're talking about today. This is the most challenging one to kind of get through, so we're going to take it through with some hypotheticals. But how do you know if someone has a legislative or administrative interest in your decision-making ability? That decision-making ability will change from individual to individual and public official to public official. So, for starters, a legislative or administrative interest is any matter that would be subject to the decision or vote of a candidate who, if elected, would be acting in the capacity of a public official, or any matter subject to the decision or vote of the public official acting in that public official's capacity. So essentially, it comes down to this. You're going to want to know what scope of authority you have in decision making. Does that look like you're an elected official making a decision in a public meeting? Or does that look like a city staff member who's deciding whether or not to grant a permit or sign a contract with somebody? You're going to want to know what your role is and your authoritative decision-making abilities for this to really make sense. So a hypothetical, specifically as it relates to legislative or administrative interest. We have Mayor Monique, who's taking classes at a local community college in her free time. There is a tuition increase that will affect all registered students at the community college. A committee awards a scholarship to Monique. This scholarship award has an economic effect on the mayor, distinct from the effect on the general public. So what's significant here in this hypothetical, you want to flag what we've already talked about. One, we know that Mayor Monique is a public official due to her elected position as mayor. So we need to know, is this available to the general public, or is it specific to some other segment? So we know from the hypothetical that this is a distinct scholarship available from the general public, so it is a gift. What we need to know more about specifically for the legislative or administrative interest analysis is who is on this committee. We don't know the specific people, and we don't know if they do have a legislative or administrative interest in Mayor Monique's decision-making authority. So before the mayor can accept a scholarship, she would need to know more. And, as we learned earlier, you can call Oregon Government Ethics Commission for advice on whether or not you can accept a gift. So now that we've talked about specifically what a gift is, we need to know, one, are you a public official, relative, or household member that's receiving something of value of more than $50 in a calendar year? And is it from a single source that's known? And does that single source have a legislative or administrative interest in your decision-making authority? So if as a public official, you think that you have a gift that you cannot receive because it meets one of those four prongs of the gift analysis, but it meets one of these gift exceptions, then it takes it out of being a gift that you cannot accept and it makes it a gift you can accept because it's considered an exception to the gift. So let's dig in a little bit deeper. There's 16 gift exceptions that the legislature has specifically exempted or accepted from being a gift that you cannot receive. For example, the first one, gifts from relatives or household members. This is great news. This means every holiday or birthday season, you can receive any valued gift from a household member or a relative. That is not considered a gift that you have to go through the gift analysis to decide whether or not you can accept that gift. The legislature has said it's not a gift because it's in this gift exception. Another one, the second one, admission provided to or cost of food or beverage consumed by the public official at a reception, meal, or meeting while representing the city. Let's say you attend a League of Oregon Cities annual conference. You're there in the capacity as a city councilor. It's a full-day conference, and the LOC is providing lunch as a feature of the agenda. That is not considered a gift that you need to go through that 4-step gift analysis to decide whether or not to eat lunch. That is actually a gift exception, specifically as it relates to you attending an LOC conference in your counselor capacity. Another example, the first one on this slide. Entertainment provided to the public official candidate or relative or household member that is incidental to the main purpose of the event. Another example of an LOC conference, let's say this fall, you're attending the 100-year LOC annual conference, and it's elevated because we're celebrating 100 years. Let's say we get your favorite band, let's say it's Sting. We contracted with them to provide a great concert on the first night of the conference. Well, you're a Sting fan, so you know that a Sting concert ticket is well over $50. So you're wondering, can I go to this concert that likely is over value of $50? Because the legislature has specifically accepted entertainment provided to a public official that is incidental to the main purpose of an event, you can attend the Sting conference to know that it's not a gift because the legislature has made it an exception. One final highlight of one of the 16 gift exceptions, the final one on this slide, contributions to a legal expense trust fund established for the benefit of the public official. This seems odd. Anyone can contribute to a legal expense trust fund established for the benefit of the public official. This one comes up in a couple different areas that we cover in Elected Essentials. So I'm highlighting it here because, for example, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, as a public official, you would have to pay for your defense. So the legislature here has created a gift exception for you to have a legal defense fund with no cap from any single source, even if they have a legislative or administrative interest, because it's a gift exception. So think before you accept a gift. You need to know whether or not it is available to the public under the same terms and conditions. If it is, then it's not a gift. But if it is specifically available to you as a public official, not on the same terms and conditions, then it is a gift, and you need to keep asking questions. You need to know if any of those 16 gift exceptions apply if it is a gift. So be familiar with ORS 244.020. Or if you have questions on exceptions, you can call OGEC for advice. You also need to keep asking whether or not the single source that is gifting you the thing, does that person have a legislative or administrative interest in your specific position as a public official? So you'll need to know what your scope of authority is in decision making. And finally, you need to know if the value of the gift is greater than $50. If it's less than $50, then you need to know whether or not over the course of a fiscal year, that single source has given you gifts greater than $50. So just to highlight that one a little bit more, over the calendar year, if a single source is giving you $5 items, you need to make sure that once you meet that $50, you no longer can accept a gift from them unless the gift exception applies. So here's an example to apply what we've learned. It's a raffle example. A county employee attends a conference open only to the public officials. The conference holds a raffle with a grand prize of a trip to Las Vegas. So you're wondering, as the county employee who is a public official, whether or not you can accept the trip to Las Vegas if you're the raffle prize winner. First, we need to know if it's a gift open to the public under the same terms and conditions. Well, we know from the hypothetical that this conference is only open to public officials. Therefore, we know that we have to keep asking questions on whether or not you can accept the gift because it is not open to the public under the same terms and conditions. I'm going to tell you that none of those 16 exceptions apply here. So we move to whether or not we know the source of the raffle prize. The source of the raffle prize in this hypothetical is unknown, so we would need to know more information about who is donating this prize of a trip to Las Vegas. We would need to know that because we need to know no anonymous sources are allowed. So we need to know who it is, and specifically if they have a legislative or administrative interest in your decision-making ability. And we're going to assume for the fourth prong here is that the value of the raffle prize is over $50. So for this example, we would need to know more information before the county employee, if the winner of the prize can accept this gift. Another hypothetical. Mayor Waldo's residence recently suffered property damage due to flooding. Members of the public set up a donation drive for Mayor Waldo. So the question is, can Mayor Waldo accept the donations? Step 1, is the financial interest distinct from the public? So we know from the hypothetical that Mayor Waldo is the specific recipient of any of the donations because of the property damage that was incurred. So we do know that it's a gift because it's not open to the general public. I'm going to tell you that no exceptions apply to this type of hypothetical. So now we need to know, do the sources of donations have an administrative or legislative interest in Mayor Waldo? So to answer this specific question, we need to know every single person who's donating, either a person or entity. The reason why? We know that the OGEC does not accept anonymous gifts. Or rather, the OGEC does not allow a person to receive anonymous gifts. We need to know the source of each donation, and we must know whether or not each person donating or entity donating, whether or not they have a legislative or administrative interest in Mayor Waldo's decision-making ability. And then last, we need to know whether or not that value is over $50. So again, Mayor Waldo will have to decide here whether or not they want to accept donations from a single source, and they need to go through this analysis for each individual donator to determine whether or not the mayor has received $50 or not in that specific calendar year. Another hypothetical. A nationwide cell phone carrier is offering a free cell service to first responders for 10 years. The promotion will only be available to active duty first responders in certain positions with state, local, or tribal government public safety agencies which contract agency-wide with the carrier. The question here, may a city firefighter take advantage of the free cell phone promotion? So starting with the first step, is this nation's cell phone carrier offering free cell phone service to the general public? No. So we know that this is a gift because it's not available to the general public under the same terms and conditions. There are no exceptions that apply for this particular hypothetical. So now we have to move on to whether or not this value is over $50 in a calendar year. Likely yes, due to how much cell phones cost per year or per month. So we're going to assume for this that yes, the value is over $50 in a calendar year. So this will hinge on whether or not the nationwide cell phone carrier has a legislative or administrative interest in the firefighter. So depending on the position that the firefighter has may depend on whether or not this gift can be received. For example, if this is a volunteer firefighter, likely the legislative or administrative scope of authority is quite limited, or likely none. So in that scenario, likely the volunteer firefighter would be able to accept this gift. However, let's say it's the fire chief. The fire chief likely has contract authority, decision-making authority, and so therefore, that may be a question or a prohibition for the chief firefighter to accept this gift. Another hypothetical. You are a city staff member and it's your manager's birthday. The two of you have known each other for years and are close friends. You decide to purchase a nice birthday gift. The question here, may your manager accept your gift? Just so you know, a legislative and administrative interest is always had by someone who is supervised by their manager. So in this circumstance, the city staff member can make a gift to their manager, but there is going to be that $50 calendar year max. So the onus is going to be on the manager to decide whether or not they want to accept any gifts from anybody that they supervise, or whether or not they want to track throughout the year to see when and if that $50 calendar year maximum is met. So here, going through the steps, this city staff member is gifting to its manager. Both individuals are public officials, and this is not open to the general public, so the manager is receiving a gift. There are no gift exceptions that apply, and as I just mentioned, there is a legislative and administrative vested interest in the city staff person gifting up to their manager. So it's going to come down to the value of that gift. If it's a $5 coffee gift card and that's the only gift that's given throughout the calendar year, the manager may accept the gift. But if it's a $100 gift card to a local grocery store or a local restaurant, then that manager will need to reject that gift because it would meet all of the criteria of the gift analysis, and it would be over the $50 threshold. So here it's going to depend on how much the value is and how much has been gifted or received throughout that calendar year. Now here is a great caveat. The supervisor can always gift as much as they want to any of the people that they supervise. There's no legislative or administrative interest when the supervisor gifts down to someone that they supervise. So before we end with the gift section, make sure you ask before accepting. You need to know whether or not it's a gift under the definition of ORS 244020. Is it open to the public under the same terms and conditions? If not, then it's a gift. You need to familiarize yourself with the 16 gift exceptions under ORS 244020-7B. Those exceptions are very specific, and again, the legislature has said even if these 4 prongs are met, if it's an exception that's listed in statute, then it takes it out from being a gift that you can't accept to a gift that you can. If no exceptions apply, you need to keep going and ask yourself, does the source have a legislative or administrative interest in your decision-making ability? So you'll need to know what your scope of authority is. And you cannot accept anonymous gifts, so you'll need to know the entity that is giving you something. And then finally, you need to know the value. The value cannot exceed $50 in a calendar year from any single source. Moving on to prohibited use of office. Oregon ethics laws state that a public official cannot use their public positions for 4 things. 1, financial gain or avoidance. 2, promise of future employment. 3, use of confidential information gained through public office. And finally, 4, representation before the governing body for a fee. So these 4 items a public official cannot use their public position for. So you need to ask yourself, but for my position as a public official, would I have been provided with or offered the same opportunity? We're going to take each in turn. So first, public officials are prohibited from using or attempting to use their official position or office to obtain financial gain or avoid financial detriment. So this applies to not only you as the public official, but remember, just like gifts, it also applies to that expansive definition of a relative or household member. And note, this applies no matter how minimal or nominal the financial gain or the financial avoidance is. Some easy examples. City official cannot use the city credit card for personal use. Additionally, a city official cannot use city property for personal use. So just like in gifts, the legislature has indicated that there are exceptions to financially gaining in your official capacity. Specifically, you can financially gain if it's a part of an official compensation package. You can financially gain if you receive an honorarium related to the public official's position. There is a maximum value of $50 unless it's related to your private occupation or expertise. For example, if a mayor is asked to speak at a conference to describe how they helped their city recover from a natural disaster, and after that mayor speaks at the conference, they're given a $50 honorarium. That mayor can receive that honorarium because of this exception to financial gain. Let's say you're a city councilor who also has the private occupation of being a dentist. Let's say that councilor dentist is asked to speak on behalf of their dentist capacity at a conference. They can receive an honorarium for speaking at a conference in their private capacity. Another permissible financial gain is reimbursement of approved expenses. Also, unsolicited awards for professional achievement. And again, contributions to a legal expense trust fund is permissible financial gain. These are the exceptions to prohibited use of office. Additionally, there's the gift exception. So remember when I said, even if you go through a gift analysis and one of those 16 exceptions apply, it removes that thing that's being gifted from being a gift to something that you can receive because it is a gift exception. That specifically is outlined as a permissible use of office because it's a gift exception. Hypothetical. A public works employee stores her parents' motorhome in an otherwise empty city storage facility, typically used for storing heavy equipment. The storage facility is only accessible to city staff. May the employee do this? The answer here is no, because it's not available to the general public. It would be an impermissible use of office. Another hypothetical. A volunteer firefighter is preparing the exterior of his house for painting. The fire department has a power washer available to loan out to the general public. The question is, may the firefighter borrow the power washer? And the answer is yes, because it's available to the general public to also loan out. Another hypothetical. A city councilor has a private business and has used the city's computer to conduct the activities of the private business. The question is, may the councilor do this? The answer is no. This would be a prohibited use of office because the city councilor has specific access to the city's computer, which the general public does not. So the councilor may not do that. Moving on to promises of future employment. A public official cannot solicit, receive a pledge, or a promise for future employment, either directly or indirectly, in exchange for a vote, official act, or influence. That makes sense. That kind of sounds like a bribe. So that is not acceptable. However, an individual or public official can get a job because of their credentials or experience. Another prohibited use of office is use of confidential information gained through public office. So a public official may not attempt to further their personal gain through the use of confidential information gained in the course of or by reason of holding their position or the activities of the public official. And this does include any attempt after the public official ceases to be a public official. A great example of this is when you're a city councilor and you have access to executive session. What an executive session is a closed-door session where you get to discuss and learn about certain areas that is allowed by law. One of those executive session reasons is to discuss real estate transactions. So as a city councilor in an executive session, learning about real estate transactions cannot use that information that's not available to the public, even if that councilor no longer is on council. As long as that information is not available to the public, it's considered confidential information gained through public office. And finally, the last category of prohibited use of office is representing a client before a governing body for a fee. So here we have things to think about. Before a public official can represent a client before their governing body for a fee. 1, that public official has to know which governing body they're on. Let's say it's city council. So that city councilor cannot represent a client before city council for a fee. Now, this does not apply to a member's employer, business partner, or associate. So for example, if a councilor is a lawyer, they cannot represent a client in front of the council for a fee. However, their associate would be able to charge a client before city council for a fee and go before the city council. So a hypothetical. Councilor Meg is a lawyer and has a client who needs representation before the Planning Commission in a land use hearing. The question is, can Councilor Meg, in her lawyer capacity, represent her client for a fee in front of the Planning Commission? The most important thing here is we know that Councilor Meg, her governing body is going to be the City Council, not the Planning Commission. So for specific ethics, for specific prohibited use of office, the answer to this question is yes. Councilor Meg can, in her lawyer capacity, represent her client in front of the Planning Commission. That's because Councilor Meg's governing body is the City Council, not the Planning Commission. Therefore, the second question, can Councilor Meg, in her lawyer capacity, represent her client for a fee in front of City Council? The answer here would be no. However, an associate or business partner would be able to represent that client in front of the City Council for a fee. Moving on to conflicts of interest. What is a conflict of interest? There are two different kinds. There's potential conflict of interest and actual conflict of interest. In a potential conflict of interest, action taken by the public official could have a financial impact on that official, relative, or business. In an actual conflict, action taken by the public official would have a financial impact on that official, relative, or business. It's helpful here to also remember that that broad definition, when we talked about in gifts, does apply to conflicts of interest as well, so it is a broad definition. For conflicts of interest specifically, the elected official will need to announce it at each meeting. And if you don't know if you have a potential or a conflict or an actual conflict of interest, then you can call Oregon Government Ethics Commission for specific advice on how to proceed. So the real difference between actual and potential conflict of interest is not going to be in the first two steps, which is announcing the conflict and disclosing the conflict of interest at each and every meeting. Where the difference is the last step. In an actual conflict of interest, if you've announced it and disclosed the actual conflict, you also need to recuse yourself from any type of information gathering, deliberation, decision-making, or voting. The most conservative advice that LOC provides is for that individual to actually leave the dais as well as the hearing or public meeting space as well. So for a potential conflict of interest, you still must announce it and disclose it at every single meeting that item is presented before the governing body. The only difference here is that public official gets to remain. They get to discuss, information gather, and vote on any of those items that they have a potential conflict of interest. In both actual and potential conflicts of interest situations, they also must be recorded in the minutes. So again, how to disclose a conflict if you are an elected official? You're going to publicly announce the nature of the conflict. The notice must be recorded in the official records of the public body, which would be the minutes, and the elected official must announce the conflict at each meeting. On each occasion the issue is discussed or debated, and this applies when the official is an appointed member of a board or a commission as well. What if you're a public employee, public official that has a conflict of interest? How do you disclose that? You're going to want to do that in writing to the appointing employing authority, and that appointed employing authority is going to designate a way to dispose of that conflict. For example, if you're a city staff person who resides in the city, and the city has the water utility, as a city staff person, you too will have that water utility bill. Well, you don't want to process your own water utility bill each month, so you're going to want to disclose that conflict in writing to your manager or your supervisor. And that manager or supervisor is going to find an alternative solution to having your water bill resolved. Hypothetical. City Z has decided to solicit bids to develop a new computer system, and the city councilors are developing criteria for the bid process. City Councilor A's brother works for an IT firm in town. The city's bid process could financially impact IT firms in town. So the first question is whether or not there's actually a conflict of interest, whether it be a potential conflict or an actual conflict. So how do we decide? The potential conflict of interest could financially impact Councilor A. We know that Councilor A has a relative, the brother, who works for an IT firm in town. The important part of this hypothetical is that the City Council is developing criteria for the public contracting bid process. The City Council at this stage has not yet decided on who they want to award their bid for. So at this stage in the public contracting phase where they're developing criteria for the bid process, the City Councilor has a potential conflict of interest. So then, question 2, we know that a potential conflict exists, so what actions can remedy the conflict? We know from a previous slide that the councilor must announce, they must disclose, but then they may remain and deliberate, information gather, and vote on anything related to the development of the criteria for the bid process. So just like gifts and just like prohibited use of office, the legislature has designated specific exceptions to potential conflicts of interest. So a conflict that derives from a prerequisite to holding a public position is a public conflict of interest exception. A great example of this: how many of you have checked your charter and you know as an elected official for city council, you must reside within the city's jurisdiction to be a member on council? That technically is a prerequisite to holding public office. So you do not need to announce a potential conflict of interest anytime a citizen goes before your governing body, because the legislature has said that that is an exception to announcing a public potential conflict of interest. Another exception is when a potential conflict of interest derives from being a board member of a nonprofit. Here, what is emphasized, I think, is going to be that being a board member of a nonprofit, you are not financially benefiting. This may differ if you are an employee or an executive director of a nonprofit where you do have financial benefit. That does not fall into this potential conflict of interest exception. It's specifically going to be a board member of a nonprofit. And lastly, the OGC has designated the public official as a member of a designated class. So this is going to be very, very specific and very limited. You're going to need to have submitted whether or not what the class is to OGEC, and OGEC will tell you whether or not you, as a public or elected official, are actually a part of a designated class for purposes of potential conflict of interest exceptions. So the rule of necessity, this comes up very infrequently and often in very small communities. What rule of necessity is? You know now, as an elected official, what your quorum is because you've read your charter. Let's say your quorum is 4 people of council. And let's say 4 people on council that are required for quorum all have actual conflicts of interest. Remember, an actual conflict of interest is going to be an individual or public official that will benefit financially from a decision before them, so they have to announce it, disclose it, and recuse themselves from participating in that discussion or vote. So what do you do if you don't have enough members that do not have actual conflicts to proceed with city business? What you're going to need to do is call OGEC, or you're going to need to contact your city attorney to decide how to proceed. What often happens when this rule of necessity needs to be invoked is that OGEC will provide very specific directives on how the public officials will need to move forward with city business. And a good hypothetical is going to be this one. A budget committee member has a spouse who is a city employee. A budget committee member makes budget recommendations to the city council, which is the body that ultimately determines the budget. So the first question is, does the committee member have a conflict of interest? So first, we know that a budget committee member has a spouse. So we know that there is a family member or relative of the budget committee member that is a city employee. And we know that a budget means money. So we know that the budget committee member is going to financially benefit, potentially, if they vote to recommend to the city council a budget that encapsulates their spouse's stipend or their salary. So at this point, a budget committee member, the budget committee is not the final arbiter of a budget passage. That's going to be under the purview of city council. So we know here the budget committee member only has a potential conflict of interest at this point because they're not voting to finalize the budget. They're only going to send on a budget for city council to approve and possibly change. So because of that lack of final arbiter decision-making ability of the budget committee member, they have a potential conflict of interest that needs to be announced and disclosed at each meeting. However, they do get to remain and move forward. So the second question is, what if the public official is not a budget committee member, but rather a city councilor? Then is there a conflict of interest? So like I just mentioned, the budget committee is the first tier of figuring out what the proposed budget should be, and that gets sent on to the city council, who is the final arbiter of the city budget. So if the public official is actually a city councilor in this hypothetical, and they have a spouse who is a city employee, then they will have an actual conflict of interest. And when I mentioned, what if an example of the rule of necessity, you on city council have for your quorum of individuals that can't proceed to pass a budget, then you'd need to contact OGEC to see how to move forward. Often, what I've heard is that OGEC will instruct individual councilors to simply vote but not deliberate or make changes to the segment of the budget in which their spouse or relative is associated. But again, that comes down to what OGEC is going to advise, which is going to come down to the factual scenarios of each specific inquiry on whether or not you have a potential or actual conflict of interest and whether or not you need to recuse or if you can remain in the voting capacity. So moving on to nepotism. There are actually no state ethics laws that prohibit nepotism. It is permissible. Relatives can be employed by same public employer at the same time or serve on the same governing body at the same time. What you need to know is that a lot of local governing documents may prohibit nepotism, and specifically related to employment law, there may be other prohibitions with supervisory capacities. But when we're talking about nepotism and ethics laws in the state of Oregon, what is prohibited is a public official cannot participate in the public body's action on a personnel item that would impact the employment of the public official's household or relative. And then additionally, if a local governing document such as a charter provision prohibits individuals that are relatives serving on the same governing body, then that too would be prohibited. But generally, public officials may not directly supervise a relative or household member. Moving on to public officials' private employment. The private employment guidelines somewhat cover what we've already talked about, but private employment guidelines include that a public official cannot engage in private business activities on their city's time, cannot use city's supplies, facilities, equipment, employees' time, records, or any other public resources for private business interests, cannot financially benefit due to your official actions, cannot use confidential information gained as a public official to obtain financial benefit for the public official, and you really need to watch out for both potential and actual conflicts of interests. Lastly, we're going to talk about Statement of Economic Interests. This is also known as the SEI annual filing, and what this goes to is to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. It's a requirement filed each year that it has to be completed online. There's a very specific filing time frame, which opens March 15th annually and closes annually on April 15th. And there is an SEI filer training on OGEC's website. What this means is that as a public official, you may have to file an additional document each year. And what this is actually talking about is disclosure of various interests, business interests, sources of income, ownership interests in real property other than principal residences, honorariums received over the value of $15, names of compensated lobbyists with associated business interests, name of entities in which the official received over $50 to participate in various meetings or travels, as well as additional items that will be found in ORS 244040 and 244070. The reason we talk about the SEI filing is not everyone knows about it when they first become a public official, and there could be personal penalties related to a late filing of an SEI. So after April 15 close date, from April 16 to April 29, it's a $10 a day penalty, which increases to $50 per day after April 29th, with a maximum penalty of personal liability of $5,000 in fines. And that brings us to a close of ethics. There are a variety of resources for you to know about. First and foremost, as we've been talking about this whole session, Oregon Government Ethics Commission has advice that they can render to you, as well as various publications that may be helpful to you, specifically a guide for public officials. And additionally, the League of Oregon Cities has a municipal handbook chapter on ethics. If you have any questions, I highly suggest you contact Oregon Government Ethics Commissions for advice on whether or not they can help you.